Before we get started with this episode of the Artists and Emotions podcast, I just want to let all of you know that this podcast is no longer just Spotify exclusive. If you've been with this podcast since the beginning, you'll know that we started this podcast on Spotify, but we've since branched out. We are now on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and basically every other place that you can find podcasts. So if you have a preference to go listen it to one of those platforms, feel free to do so. We are also up on YouTube with the Artists and Emotions podcast YouTube channel. So if you got a preference or you're doing something where you don't have the ability to listen to us on Spotify or a podcasting realm, you can see the full physical version of this podcast on YouTube. So please feel free to do so. Once you're there, leave us a like and tell us what you think of the show. Rate the show. Everything that you can do to tell us how we can improve the show will make it that much better. But now, on with the episode. Welcome to the Artists and Emotions podcast. My name is Cody Alexander Curtis, and I am your host. Today, I have a very special guest with me. Today, I have Brittani O'Connell. Brittani is an actress. She is a health and fitness coach, specifically for actors, and she also just started up a brand new podcast called Booked and Balanced. We're going to get into that a little bit into this episode because I definitely have some thoughts, but there's a lot of things I also agree with Brittani on in terms of her perspective about things in the industry we both operate in. But Brittani, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Cody. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to chat about all the things that we apparently both have so much in common about. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because while I was doing my research and while I was listening to the podcast and everything else, there's one other thing we talked like just very briefly before we got this podcast started, but you seem to also be, besides the whole health and fitness thing and actor for like on-screen thing, are you also a bit of a theater baby? Am I getting that correct?
Yes. Yeah. My degree is actually in theater. I came from a background of theater. I did some kind of theatrical, musical, whatever, ever since like kindergarten, I would say. I didn't start doing theater, like full productions, full-fledged theater productions until high school. So I kind of got a late start in terms of like, I didn't do any child acting other than just like if my school had a concert where there were some random scenes written in. I think we did like a Mary Poppins themed like concert night one time, and I played like one of the kids they just wrote scenes in between songs. But other than that, I didn't start doing theater until high school. And then it was later into high school where I asked my theater teacher, what can I do in the industry? And she's like, you can teach it. So I went to school to teach it originally. And then after a semester, I was like, oh, I don't want to teach it. I want to. So that's what happened. There was actually a choir at the college that I went to that was auditioning for a couple of soprano spots. And that choir was going to meet at the same time as one of my core education courses for the next semester. So I auditioned saying if I get in, then I'll just be a theater major. And that's exactly what happened. And I like really haven't looked back since. So.
Gotcha. That's incredible. Now, that is one thing. Was that like the turning point? Because I find that with actors, there's always 2 points with us making this what we want to do for the rest of our lives. There's the initial thing, which, like you were saying, is it's an enjoyable thing that we do, but we don't think too much about it. And then there's the other point. Usually, at least for me, it happened like right around early adulthood, where it was like, oh, this is something really special, whether it's a production or something that you see, and I want to do this for the rest of my life. What was sort of that turning point for you, where you're like, I liked this before, but now I see how special this is for me, and I want to keep moving forward with it?
I love this question because I know the exact moment, and it was, I don't remember the year, but it was one of my first couple years in college. I went to see a production of Memphis, the musical, at the Fox Theater here in St. Louis. I went with my dad, and oddly enough, that's the show that made me say, wow, I really want to do this for the rest of my life. I think it was just like one of those musicals that just fully encompassed the storytelling in all aspects. I felt like everything was so strong and the storytelling was so strong and like it affected me so much. But the funny thing is there's really not like a role in that show for me. I'm so white. And
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I could play the mom like when I'm like 50, but like, yeah, that was the show that I saw and was like, wow, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And then I pursued theater super hard from then on. And it wasn't until more recently, like the last couple of years, I've been more film and TV focused. And that's kind of the direction I'm heading in. If there's a show that comes up that I really want to do, then I'll go out for it. But right now my focus is very much on film, TV, and stunt work. So
Yeah, that's that. I have such an appreciation for that. That's like an evolution of growth. Because I don't know if you experience this, but I've always been somebody who's been parallel with theater and film in terms of my enjoyment and wanting to do productions. But when I was going to college, there seemed to be this stigma against actors who decided they wanted to do film instead of just staying in theater and pursuing theater in like the traditional Broadway route.
yeah.
So was that your experience too, or was it like generally neutral across the board?
Honestly, I think what's crazy about that is the school that I went to, it was in its second year of the theater program when I joined. So it was
Wow.
very new, a very small, like liberal arts school. Actually, no, it's a Baptist school here in Missouri. And I did not get any kind of, it was very much all the classes were being created as you go. And if I could have done anything different in college, it would have been to study strictly acting because that is like where my heart lies. But I also don't regret having the generalized theater degree because I learned so many things. Like the amount of people that don't know how to work a drill is insane to me. I'm glad to not have to do that often anymore. But just the amount of people who don't have a general knowledge in like all aspects of the work is like crazy to me. But I wouldn't say that I've had any kind of feelings of like the stigma. I think I set the stigma myself. I think it took me a long time to uh, tell myself that I could do film, even though I wasn't technically trained in it. Like I
Yeah.
was technically trained in theater and am still to this day way more hypercritical. And this is the thing I love about film for me. I'm a very something that I talk about my coaching all the time. I am a recovering perfectionist, and theater and music, particularly in singing, brings out that perfectionistic tendency in me because I've studied it so hard. And there's like a right way to sing, and there's a right way to dance, and there's a right way to do things. But with acting and with film, I feel like I can just like show up as myself and not think too much, which is unheard of for me. Truly, it's unheard of for me to not like be constantly like ticking in my brain at all times. So I think that's one reason why I'm so drawn to film. But I would say if anybody's created a stigma around like transitioning from theater to film, is myself. And then I got over that pretty quickly once I was like, oh, this is pretty much the same. And actually, when I look back on it, I actually think I was always built for film even more than I was built for theater. I love theater. I'm one of those people, I think you're probably one of those people too, who is kind of like a lover of all the things and will do all the different things. But theater will always have a special place in my heart, but it's just like not the focus at this moment in time.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. We're gonna have a lot more in common than I originally thought. So, okay, besides that, and you did mention your coaching, and I do wanna get into that because in terms of your perspective on things, in terms of balance and the industry, and specifically what we're all taught growing up as theater kids and as artists, I want to get into that.
Yeah.
But a big part of your business and about yourself as an actor is also sort of the health and fitness and sort of general overall well-being as a person. So how did that side of everything get started for you?
Well, long before I was an artist, I was an athlete. So I played all the sports. And by high school, I was playing basketball, softball, and soccer. I played volleyball in middle school. I never ran track or cross country because let's be real, I don't like running enough for the sake of running. So that was not going to be the thing. As long as there was like some kind of objective in terms of like getting a ball in the hoop or getting a ball in the goal or whatever, that was fine on the running aspect. But I don't love running in general enough to just like run for like 2 hours straight. So no thanks. But I was an athlete long before I was like doing more artistic stuff. And so when I left high school, I obviously was not like a full-time athlete anymore. I could have gone, it was either playing softball in college, which was an option. There were a couple of options to do that, to get a scholarship to go play softball in college, or I could have done theater. And the school that I went to was a junior college here in Missouri, and they had a scholarship. It was a tech theater scholarship, basically, where you would work every Tuesday and Thursday to basically get your school paid for on the sets for all the shows at the school. So I ended up choosing theater. My dad was a little heartbroken about choosing theater over softball because he was like the guy that took me to all my games and pitching lessons and catching lessons, like all this stuff. And I really was really serious about it for a really long time. But something about theater always felt more, neither career path was going to be lucrative in my mind at the time. So I was like, okay, well, which one do I like enjoy more? And it was always the arts, because not only did I feel like it was a challenge and fulfilling for me, but I also felt like there was something about it that like helped other people. So in terms of the coaching aspect, though, where that came into play was like after college, when I didn't have, access to like dance classes and stuff all the time, I really became kind of I felt out of place because I didn't have any kind of athletic endeavor like moving me unless I was like in a show or something. And so I started to try to work out, but the initial onset of working out was to get smaller, to book more like ingenue roles. And that was my drive and motivation at the time, but it wasn't enough because I just kept starting and stopping and starting and stopping. And then I moved to New York in 2017 and pretty quickly realized that if I wanted to like keep up with the hustle culture, which I was always going to keep up with the hustle culture at that time, if I wanted to keep up with that, I needed to take care of my body. And so I started to get a little bit more serious about like working out and food and stuff, but it was still along the lines of restriction and still along the lines of how can I get as small as possible to be as marketable as possible and just all this stuff, because in high school I felt like I always got like all the secondary character roles and I never got any lead roles, and I felt like I blamed it on being like slightly beefier than everybody else, like all the other girls. So that was my mindset for a really long time. And then in fast forward to 2019, I did a theme park contract. Have you ever done any theme park work, Cody?
I haven't. I've heard so much about them, though. I just haven't had a chance to do it.
If you haven't done it, I recommend doing at least one contract because they are hard, but they will like change you as an artist. I'm kind of over it unless it's a stunt driven show. I would do that, but as of now, I don't really want to do any more theme park because I've done like 3 or 4 contracts at this point. But in the summer of 2019, I booked my first big, so I'd been living in New York for 2 years. I booked my first big like contract outside of New York from New York. So I went to small town, West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, at a theme park called Kennywood Park. And I literally only had time to work out and go to work. Like I worked 6 days a week there. We only had 1 day off a piece. And there was only 7 cast members, so every time we had our day off, we were alone. So the other 6 people were working and you were alone. So all I had time to do was go to the gym and eat and go to work. Like that is basically it. And so at that time, that was the time when I started to shift my mindset from like working out to be like smaller and skinnier and like just more attractive, what I was thinking in my mind, to how can I, maybe if I approach it to like being stronger, because this contract is hard as heck and I need to make sure that I can keep up, because we were outside 8-9 hours a day singing in the 100-degree heat, and I had to be able to sustain that for 4 months straight. So that was when my mindset shifted. And then I told myself by the end of the summer, I was like, one day I'm going to help other people do this too. didn't expect it to be literally like 3 months later when the pandemic hit, and
Yeah.
I had nothing to fucking do in the middle of New York City because everything shut down. So I saw that the National Academy of Sports Medicine, which is a certification program for personal trainers and nutrition coaches, it was already in my mind. I saw they were having a big sale, and I was like, well, I guess now's the time. So I studied for, the 6 months or whatever, and then got my certification in August of 2020 and started the business. So that is kind of the evolution of that. And it came from not having any athletics in my life to wanting to be skinnier for jobs, to wanting to be stronger for jobs, to wanting to help other people discover that it's not all about being smaller or being a different body type or whatever. It's about finding what works for you. And kind of to touch on like what I talked about in my podcast is the sustainability of it all. There's no way that I would be where I am today if I didn't discover that sustainability was more important than hustling. There's just no way, because it takes years, as you know, like it takes years to like make a dent in this thing. And you gotta find what works for you. And yes, there will be moments of hustle, like, can I do this? But ultimately, it's about figuring out what works for you. And I really believe that part of that is taking care of your like physical and mental health and wellness. So
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I completely and wholeheartedly agree. Uh, it's interesting for me hearing your experience because our experience in some ways is very similar, but in other ways it's very different. I grew up in the state of Maine, and there's no
oh,
industry, whether that's like theater or film or really anything here. Like, if you want to do it, you've really got to like you've got to either have parents who have been in the arts in some capacity, one way or another, even recreationally.
yeah.
Luckily for me, that was my parents. They're still
Oh,
so supportive. But at the same time, if you want to get into film, which for me, that didn't happen until 2018, because from the age of 5 until 2016, it was all theater all the time,
yeah.
24/7.
Wow.
But
5 years old, huh?
yeah, 5.
Okay.
Let me. It's funny you brought up the Mary Poppins thing because my first show was a version of Jack and the Beanstalk, but for elementary school kids.
Of course.
I played a dog, and and my brother played Jack. So
Oh.
that was, let me tell you, some interesting dinner conversations. I can tell you that much. But when it comes to film, the thing that I quickly realized is that if you want to be an actor for on camera, you're not just going to be an actor for on camera. You're also going to learn how to be a director and a screenwriter and a producer and a casting director and all of these various things, which at the time I didn't really see the benefit to, besides the fact that I was having an enjoyable experience. But now, being so far along, it, especially in today's day and age and where the industry and its climate is,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to have sort of all of that knowledge base. And for
Yeah.
you, it's like same kind of thing. Like, I was raised, or my high school instructor, I was very lucky to have him. He studied directly under Lee Strasberg. So all of our productions weren't just productions. We sort of learned like a grade B version of what method acting actually is, but we also always built the sets, learned about lighting, learned about how everything on the technical aspect of being on stage is like. And the thing that I found as far as the industry space is now, if you're somebody, whether it's in theater or on screen, if you're somebody who has a basic knowledge of not just how to be an actor, but you know how every other department works, and specifically if somebody asks you to be an assistant camera or help them move C-stands or what, it is the greatest benefit,
Yeah.
especially if you're an actor who understands that at the end of the day, film is more of an editor's medium than it is anything else, because nothing gets made if the editor isn't putting it together. So I am really glad that the fact that you brought all of that up. And speaking of the industry, let's dive right into balance and hustle culture and all of the things that this industry has pushed on us since we were little kids. And the first thing I want to dive into is, what are your biggest pet peeves with some some of the ideas that either actors or this industry thinks is okay, but is more of a detriment to people in the long run?
Oh man, I'll keep to a few, but as I get deeper and deeper into this industry, the list grows because I'm like, wait, and then a lot of these things are things that I believed in at one point, and
Yeah.
just I don't regret going through that process, but that's why I do what I do today, is to help other people avoid that, knowing that you don't need to do that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, my first one is the mentality that if you can see yourself doing anything else outside of acting, do that instead, because you have to be all in on acting or you're not going to make it. And I just obviously don't believe that, because I found and I did believe that for a long time, to where I would like be suffering. I would live that starving artist mentality, and
Yep.
I would talk about being a starving artist as if I was like prideful of it, like it was like some kind of like rite of passage, like I have to be doing this to be a real actor. But the trouble is, when we get into that, when we start to put the things, and it kind of loops into my second pet peeve, which is like putting your basic needs like aside and expecting yourself to be able to like show up and do your best work. There's a reason why there's that, I forget what it's called, but that hierarchy of needs. Like there's a reason why like the necessities are like the first thing that need to happen, because if you don't have those, you're going to spend all of your time worried and stressed about those things, and you're not going to be able to show up to the best of your ability in the work that you do. And so when people and mentors and stuff told me in the past, like, if you can see yourself doing anything else, do that instead, because you're going to have to go on your acting career. Of course, at the time I was like, hell no, I can't see myself doing anything else. I'm not doing anything else. And so I would do it to the point where I wouldn't be eating, or I wouldn't be sleeping, or I wouldn't be, whatever. And I would just be expecting myself to show up the best I could. And I didn't really know what I was missing when I wasn't sleeping and wasn't eating. And that mentality, I think, just like limits us as actors. I mean, a lot of us actors are very multi-talented. We have a lot
Yep.
of other talents,
Mm-hmm.
because we've kind of been forced into having to pick up other talents to be able to support ourselves.
Yeah.
But like for me, I think I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I mean, my dad, when I was younger, so my dad owned a furniture restoration business out of our garage. So I was very familiar with owning a business and working from home and doing all that stuff. My first business I ever had was a lawn care leaf raking business, where I would like go. My dad taught me about expenses, like buying the bags and buying the rake and stuff like that, and then going around door to door with like little multicolor flyers and being like, hey, I'll rake your leaves for $20 or whatever, in my neighborhood. And that was my first business. And I would also do like the lemonade stand stuff, and like stand at the end of the driveway and play my violin for anybody who would want a cup of lemonade. And like I always had like an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think a lot of actors do kind of have that, because we are
Yeah.
entrepreneurs as an actor. We have to like market ourselves. We have to be kind of our team until you get a little bit of a team. And then you still have to like intermingle with your team. And it's
Yeah.
just, it is very much that as well. But when I let go of the idea that only being an actor made me a real actor, and I started my business, and it's like, well, like literally honestly, like I hate kind of saying this, because um it can come off a little insensitive, but I do not mean it like this. But the pandemic was probably the best thing to have happened to me, because it forced me to like take a step back and be like, oh, I need to figure something else out. I'm not giving up, but I need to figure something else out. It's
Yeah.
never crossed my mind one time to give up on my acting career, because I know without a doubt that it's the thing I want to do. But it has crossed my mind on, is this model that I am working with, in terms of like working for other people, working this 10,000 other gigs, like whatever on the side, is that sustainable for me? And full circle all comes back to saying sustainability. And the answer was no. So, because I wasn't able to have the flexibility I needed to do it at the level I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I never would have imagined that my coaching business has become what it has become today, but I would not change it for the world. And if that's one thing I would say to other actors, is like, I can totally see myself in the future becoming, instead of a fitness coach, becoming like a business building coach for other actors who have other skills, who want to turn that into something that can support themselves. I can totally see that being my trajectory. It's not the end all be all to only do acting. You are so much more than just an actor.
Yeah.
And when you have your basic needs met, like financial security and food on the table and a roof over your head and comfortable, like taking care of your mental health and your physical health, when all those things are met, you are able to be that much more of an actor.
Yeah.
And so that, I would say, that was a really long-winded answer, but I would say that is like one of the biggest pet peeves I have, is hearing anybody at all say, don't do anything else other than acting, because if you don't, you're not a real actor. Like, God, that's so annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting hearing all of your points, because they're so good, and I completely agree. But I also know that there's two people in particular we both follow in terms of the coaching actor space, and that's Sam Valentine and Gabriel Bin Las.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. I would say that for me, it wasn't until I discovered both of those two that my whole perspective changed. And specifically, 2023 was a big year for me in terms of just the overview of looking at things. And I've discovered, for me, there's two things that just, I don't think there's any other way to say it than that it just pisses me off that the industry actually pushes it. And number one is this sentence that seems to be thrown around so casually, which is, if you look at professional musicians or lawyers or doctors or like X, Y, and Z, you need to be working harder than they do to make anything happen in this industry. And that's also in regards to classes. But when I look at it, I have relatives and family friends who are lawyers and doctors, and I'm just thinking to myself, they get most of their work and experience on the job. They aren't constantly training every single week. I mean, yes, doctors and lawyers, they get their certificate once, maybe twice a year to keep themselves sharp. But the thing that makes them different than most of the actors who go after this is that doctors and lawyers will only take a specific class if they feel or want to learn something new about what they're doing.
Right.
They don't have this sense of obligation that they need to constantly be in a class 24/7, working day in and day out. And that brings me to the other thing, which was the big shift for me last year, is that if we look at the people we're trying to play, the characters that we want to become, the stories that we want to tell, most of the characters and people that will have the chance to play are the mother from across the street. They are the construction worker who goes to his job day in and day out. All of these people that we actors profess we want to play, they are not people who study acting to become better actors so they can tell the story of other actors. And what do acting classes do? Acting classes, they give you a way to view techniques and a way to put emotion across on screen or on stage. But they're not life classes. They're not therapy classes or life coaching sessions. And I'm gonna give a big shout out to a couple of books. One I know for a fact you've read, and we've briefly talked about it, which is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like, that is one of my favorite books, and I plan to reread it again this year, because
I read it once a year. I read it once a year because I feel like it can be easy to get caught up in like the overarching whatever your goals are. And I have come to the realization that the goal is not actually the most important part. It's the process. And if you can't get the process under control, the goal is never going to happen. So it's almost like you need to set a goal and forget the fuck about it. Like, forget about it, set the goal, forget about it, focus on the process to get to the goal, and the goal will be there before you know it.
Exactly. And I'm so curious what your favorite story from the book was, because I know in terms of the health and fitness space, the one that really struck me when I was reading it was the story of the guy who came to James, and James was basically just like, just go into the gym 5 minutes every single day or every single week. Just do that. And slowly over the course of time, it led to the guy losing like 100 pounds.
Yes.
And it was like for the first month or so, that's all he did was go in there day in and day out. So what was, I mean, it might be that story, it might be another one, but what was your favorite part of that particular book? Because I agree, I think the book's fantastic.
Honestly, I think that the thing that stands out to the most to me is that little section of the book, and where he talks about the 2-minute rule, like literally
Yeah.
making it so stupid easy. But the trouble with that, and this is why, like, I honestly am going to start like prescribing the book as like required material for any of my clients who like come to
Yeah.
my doors, because it is so valuable in terms of like when you're coming in to start new habits, because that's all you want to do when you want to lose weight, when you want to tone up, when you want to do whenever you want to do literally anything in life. It's all about creating different habits than the ones that you have now. And I love the idea, and have not always loved this idea, because I very much used to be the person, and still sometimes have to catch myself and slow myself down, being like, okay, well, I'm going to go from not working out at all to working out 5 times a week. And that's what I'm going to expect of myself, which is so unrealistic. And it sounds so crazy now when I say it out loud that I used to do that. Or I used to be like, oh, I'm going to go from eating, fast food a few times a week to not eating it at all, like at all whatsoever. I'm going to completely cut it out. Like, what do you do when you're a kid and your parents are like, you can't have that cookie? You're going to want the cookie more. That it's
Yeah.
actually psychologically built into us to anything that it's told that we can't have it, like, we
Yeah.
want it more. And so
Oh,
I do love that section of the book where he talks about literally making it so stupid easy. But the problem is we don't value those things because we have been taught that everything should be hard as fuck.
yeah,
If it's not
exactly.
hard,
It's
not hard, it's not working.
which is such bullshit. And it's so funny because the the biggest thing that a lot of actors don't realize, and one thing I implore more actors to do, is that, acting is great. You want to learn how to become a great actor just in terms of making this a sustainable career. Study business people. Because the details of the entertainment industry, the details are different. The principles behind what makes a good entrepreneur and a good business, they're all the same.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that's different. And I'm glad you brought up the psychological aspect when it comes to the child in the cookie jar, because for me, in terms of, if we're talking about something that can be business related but is more so craftsmanship related, and something that I don't think enough acting teachers touch on, is the idea of the experiences that we went through as a child, as a teenager, into our early adulthood. If those things are not looked after, they morph the people that we become. And
Yeah.
there's this book, not going to try to, I keep saying that I'm going to try to learn the pronunciation of this author's name, but nope, still have not done it yet. But the book's called The Body Keeps the Score. I
Oh, yeah, I've
don't,
heard of that. I haven't read it yet, but I have heard of that. I've have several people who read that.
this is a book that, after reading it, once again, another book I want to read again this year, but I implore not just like creative people, but every person who can, to read the book, because there's a big emphasis in it that the trauma that we go through, and trauma doesn't necessarily mean like a big life altering thing. It could be
Right.
someone like the cookie jar thing, or someone stealing our peanut butter and jelly sandwich when we were at lunch in middle school. Like, all of those little things are cellularly deep, and if we don't address them or look at them for what they are,
Mhm.
they will morph our perspective, the way we view the world, even the subconscious psychological things that we don't even realize that we do.
Yeah.
It goes from that, and how we were raised by our parents. You mentioned everything with your father. My mother got a business degree from college. Her and my father, for a little bit, had an electricity business because my father's a master electrician.
Yeah.
But even when that business wasn't up, when my mother was my age, she was a full-time mom, a full-time wife. She was going to college full-time. She had a full-time job, and she was watching her brother's kids every once in a while. It's all of these things that morph us into who we are, but
Yeah,
it's not.
you probably saw all that and was like, "Okay, this is how it is. I gotta keep
Yeah.
doing 100 things."
And it's one of those, exactly, you're 100% correct. But with this book in particular last year, it's the one thing that shifted my mindset to be, classes are great, but the thing is, the things that make us great actors is the the classroom of life that we have around us and
I
the
agree.
things from our own history. I would say even when it comes to the way that I audition, there is, I don't even want to know how many questions I have now, but there's a full questionnaire that I go through on every single aspect based on history. Even though that kind of stuff is, number one, it's not told something that we should be doing,
Yeah.
and number two, the whole idea of diving into a character's experiences when they are a kid, a teenager, an adult, it's not something that is really talked about all that much in classroom or from acting teachers.
Yeah.
And for me, when I look at the people that we all look up to, like the greats of the industry who have made stories that really latch onto us, that is something that in their performance you can already see without them expressly needing to say it.
Yeah. I think that I agree with you. I don't think that I think that acting classes are so valuable because
Yeah.
it creates a safe space for you to explore these things for yourself while bringing your life experience in. But I totally agree with you that life experience completely impacts the way that you are able to show up. And I think that kind of taking it back to what I was talking about earlier, when it comes to how do you expect yourself to show up if like your basic needs aren't being met, that will impact the way that you are able to show up. But there are so many different ways, like when it comes down to it, when you're trying to figure out what are the priorities for you right now, like what area of life, like whether it's finances, health, relationships, career, mindset, spirituality, whatever it is, like what is that priority of life for you right now that is kind of if you did some work in that little bubble, what would be the biggest impact? If finances are somewhere where you're struggling, then maybe it's not the greatest idea to take that acting class. Well, then if you can't take that acting class, what can you do? And I fully believe that there are so many things that you can do. You can
Yeah.
watch the shows that inspire you. You can listen to podcasts, listen to other people who inspire you. You can watch videos of interviews with people who inspire you. You can study human behavior, like literally
Yeah.
watch people, go somewhere and watch people. Like there's so many things you can do. And a lot of that is just comes from like living life.
All of the actors that have made it in their autobiographies, they talk about that. Yes, there are times in their days where they work exceptionally hard and they're going to classes and they're working on the business of their acting. But if you read the other portion of what their lives was like, their lives were not consumed by their acting careers. Their
Yeah.
lives were made of their acting careers, and very much like, first of all, there needs to be more acting coaches and like specifically life coaches for actors, which is why I'm very grateful for what you're trying to do and what you have been successfully doing, because
Yeah.
I think it's great across the board. And speaking of that, I think this is just a good transitional point. You can talk about sort of your own experience, and of course this podcast is set up to be a safe space, so share as much or as little as you want to about what has your own, going through all of this, what has your own mental health journey sort of been like, and what have been the things that have sort of helped you? We've already talked about one part of it, which is the sustainability factor and
Yeah.
finding methods that work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Before I touch on that, I just wanted to share just like a brief story of when I first moved to New York. I think maybe to date, the best piece of advice I've ever gotten from a fellow person in the industry who had done several Broadway shows. At this point, I was working with him. His name is Alan H. Green. He just had a birthday recently, but he'd done several Broadway shows, and I was working with him at the nonprofit. He was a deacon at the church that I worked with the nonprofit in conjunction with, and I would talk to him about things, and I would ask him questions, and he shared with me one time, he's like, the biggest thing I could tell you is to find something outside of acting that you love, that you can do, because if acting is the only thing that you are like head deep in, and well, looking back on it, I think he could tell that that's how I was operating. I had my head in the career bucket out of all of the areas of life, the career bucket for so long that I was like literally running myself into the burnout ground. And when he said that to me, it still took a while for it to click. Like I was still in the hustle culture mentality. It was easy to get in the hustle culture mentality there because auditions would be like open call auditions for non-union people. You'd have to like go at like 5 o'clock in the morning and sign a list to hopefully be seen. And wait all day there and sing at 3 p.m. after you've been up since 4. And it was just like a lot. But I think looking back on that moment and him telling me find something you love outside of acting was honestly, it took a few years for it to permeate, but when it finally hit and I did find something that I really enjoyed, and not to mention that it kind of was like the perfect happy medium of like being a creative and then like helping. It took a while for it to get to helping other creatives. I think when I first started my business, I naturally had more creatives because that was my community. But now that I've transitioned into a coach that is specifically for creatives, like I couldn't be happier with who I get to work with because I understand them to an extent that like no other personal trainer will be able to understand. And that I think is what is valuable. But to answer your question about my kind of own mental health journey, I believe it's a never ending journey because here's the deal. When every time you get to another level of your career, it's like starting from scratch in terms of your capacity. So you're constantly learning and growing, and every stage is like new and scary. And I have definitely come through, like I mentioned previously before, perfectionism and just people pleasing in general took over a lot of my mental health for a really long time, especially my adulthood, because, and I love my dad. My dad has been like my number one fan since I was born. But he kind of taught me early on that like if you're not winning, you're not doing justice. You know, if you're not number one, it's the whole stupid Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last like thing. And
Yeah.
so I took that and I got people telling me all the time in elementary school and all these things, like everything you touch turns to gold and like all this stuff. So I really took all that really personal. And anytime I felt like I didn't meet up to either other people's standards or my own standards for myself, which were unrealistically high, I was failing. So it was very all or nothing too. And so these are themes that I have brought into my coaching because I see that perpetually in a lot of other actors because of our tendency and the industry overall. Like it kind of makes us feel like we have to be very image based. We have to be very perfectionistic. We have to be on it all the time or we're not valuable. We're not going to be hired. When's the next job? Like all that stuff. So my journey with perfectionism, all or nothing, people pleasing has come a long way. I'm not perfect, ironically so. Unironically, I guess. I'm still not perfect at not trying to be perfect or not having an all or nothing mentality. But the difference is now that I'm aware of those and I'm aware of kind of what triggers those, and I can stop that in its tracks before it takes over my whole being and I start to feel like defeated or depleted. And I don't sit in those feelings as long as I used to. Like before, it would be like months before I realized, oh, I'm like people pleasing the shit out of this situation. But now I'm like, oh, I'm realizing it in the moment and I can kind of reel it back and talk myself out of it and understand that I don't have to please everyone and I'm not going to please everyone. And there are going to be people who watch my work or hang out with me and are like, I get all the time that I'm intimidating all the time. And I used to take that so personally, like, wow, I just want to come off as the person who's like bubbly and nice and friendly and all that stuff. But the thing is I'm just extremely driven and motivated. And I love what I do so much that I put a lot of energy and time into it. And if that means I'm intimidating to somebody else who doesn't do that, then that's not my problem. That's a them problem. And I'm going to move on from that. Still take some effort, you know, because you want people to like think you're a good person. And that's, I think, just when you're at all aware of the people around you and how you kind of operate in the world, that's all you want. And sometimes I feel like I want to be a good person so bad that I end up like talking myself into feeling like I'm a bad person internally. And that's called anxiety. That's why we have medication. Yeah. But I have since, speaking of medication, I have a little bit of medication that helps with that. And then just like having tools, you know, journaling or I really don't do as much meditation as I probably could, but meditating, the gym, working out is a huge thing for me. as far as like my safe space. But overall, it's getting to that mindset that you're never going to stop learning and growing, especially as actors, because we are literally naturally growing into the things that we can do. Like, we're going to go from a different life to another life where we're going to be able to go from playing high school, whatever, to playing young mom, whatever, to playing grandma, whatever, to playing old crazy lady, whatever. Like, we're literally going to be constantly growing with it. And I think, honestly, I think that's so beautiful. And the sooner we can get behind knowing that it's a constant growth period, that is exciting, and not, it can be scary, but it's more exciting than anything. I think that's like the key to kind of maintaining momentum in this thing, and knowing that there's enough out there for everyone. The abundance mentality is really important too.
Yeah, that's great. I love everything there. And you said something that I think is just, I think it's super, super critical in terms of over the course of this podcast, specifically like full circle applying it to what you just said, is making yourself just a fully well-rounded person in acting, but in every other aspect of your life that is important to you. It will help. Look, we as actors, our anxiety can sometimes we feel is what makes us special. Like, it's true, especially if you're type A personalities, like many actors, like you, like myself. It can help alleviate some of that. And as soon as you do become a well-rounded person with all of these things in your corner, it makes you, it allows you to take a step back and realize that, acting is super, super important, but it's not like the thing that defines you as a person. It's just not. And I encourage everybody who is like, this industry is tough enough as it is, but if you want to give yourself hope, watch any number of movies that have come out where the age range of actors you see on screen, whether they're small parts or not, is like across the board. Like, if you can watch something where there are actors who are in your age group or the next age group, or like the grandmotherly character or the crazy old lady, I just find that so inspiring, especially since, for a fact, look, do actors like have notoriety and success in some cases? Yeah. But a good portion of the time, it's like, if there's hope for them, it means there's hope for you too.
Yeah.
And it's just I'm very appreciative of your whole perspective and sort of everything you just said, because once again, it's certainly, depression and mental health is something that is known worldwide.
Yeah.
But specifically in the creative space, where we hear about it, we get like once every 3 to 4 years where a celebrity will come out and talk about it.
Yeah.
But then it's just sort of left on the cutting room floor and everybody forgets about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another important aspect of like keeping your mental health on the up is kind of allowing yourself to understand that you're truly not the only person who is feeling the things that you're feeling, and that there are actually, it's funny that you brought up Sam and Gabrielle, because I'm in the membership with them, so I'm in contact with them all day, every day, with Sam and Gabrielle and the other like 50 some odd artists that are in there. And
that's incredible.
There's actually like, there's a channel in there called the Safe Space channel, where we can literally just like drop something that's like laying heavy on us or whatever. And it's so valuable, because knowing that you're not the only person who has felt like, oh, like I can think of a couple things like, oh, I feel like I've been really down on my career lately. And like, for me particularly, I'm actually going to be moving soon. And so a lot of my mental energy has been into that, and finding an apartment, and like freaking out about the finances of an apartment on my own for the first time, and like all this stuff. And it's like truly been taking a lot of energy from me, to where I've had to tell myself, like, it's okay that my energy can't be fully in the career bucket at this point. I call these different aspects of life buckets. I feel like it's just like easier for me. But but there's been a couple days where I've been like, I feel like I've been so absent in this aspect of my life. And in the past, I would be freaking out like, oh my God, am I giving up? Like, but like truly it's just like a moment in life where like, no, this needs more attention than anything else right now. And that's important. And it's okay to maybe not be as like all in on that as I want to be at this moment, but there are still things that I can be doing. This is all part of the experience of becoming an actor who can sustain this career. But it's so nice to be able to know that like literally like 10 other people are like, oh my God, I've been feeling the same thing too lately. Like it's
Yeah.
really, we're truly not alone in those
No.
feelings, even if we feel like it. And I think the best thing you can do in those moments is like, first of all, if you don't have like a small community of people that you can like touch base with and be like, man, I'm really feeling shit right now, like get that. And then secondly, use that and don't let anybody make you feel like those feelings aren't valid, because they are. They're part of it. Feel them, because that's the only way through them. That's what I always try to say.
That's I love that phrase. And once again, I gotta give a big shout out to that. I also gotta, I don't know if they're ever gonna see this, but I do wanna, I and certainly not taking credit for this, and I want to say a big thank you to Sam and Gabrielle because of how much they've talked about community. And
Yeah.
as soon as I heard that they were doing the membership, I got excited for every actor who is communicating with them or taking their classes or what have you. Because I know for me, like I'm not just an actor. I'm also a filmmaker and a director and a screenwriter. And I've had the chance to. I've lived in Maine. I lived in Georgia all of last year, and I have friends who are like, my community is basically worldwide at this point, between the actors, filmmakers, and everybody that I know, and that's my community.
Yeah.
And this specifically, I have a community. I also have a best friend, which for me, it's invaluable for you to have somebody who knows how to pick you up when you're down,
Yeah.
who can help you whenever, like you said, are going through a tough time and you need help sort of migrating through it. And
Yeah.
then in my case, there are certain circumstances where I'm down on myself where I don't need to be, where my best friend Zach likes to, first of all, love the guy. He's also the most brutally honest person I've ever met. And he'll just say to me, look, I know you feel bad, but this is not something that you need to be upset about. And I need you to do me a favor and get the fuck off of your ass and get back to work, because otherwise I might have to come and get you. Which is, and that's for me, that is my version of a community. Nobody needs somebody who's that brutally honest. But for me, it's really helped. And the idea that community is growing within the entertainment space and within the actor space specifically, I'm glad that you've got that. I'm glad that that's growing for so many creatives that are out there, because let's be honest, this industry, a good portion of the time, does feel like we're on our own through this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's just the way the industry has structured itself, but it doesn't need to be that way. And
No.
especially after the strikes last year, it
Yeah.
doesn't really feel like it's going to be that way that much longer.
I think it's ironic because I think I was taught another thing that I was taught by a lot of mentors was like, this is a very cutthroat industry, whether that's theater or film or whatever. And I think in some ways it can be that, but I honestly, like, some people ask me like, you know, how are things going for you, like on film sets or whatever? And I'm like, I truly feel like either people lied to me or I just have somehow fallen into the right circles, because it's often so good and so
Yeah.
collaborative and so community driven. Like there's like, yeah, we all have those feelings of like jealousy or animosity in terms of just like dealing with our own insecurities or whatever. Like, you know, just like we have a safe space channel, we also have a celebrations channel, and sometimes people will post like 20 celebrations in a row for them, including myself, and I'm sure that can be triggering for some other people who feel like nothing's fucking happening for them right now. But
Yeah.
that's the thing, is I feel like I've ended up in these communities like TM and just like the communities that I've formed, even in like my business coaching community that I have now, like that I don't know anything else other than supportive. So
Yeah.
it's interesting because when I do come across something that is more cutthroat and isn't supportive, it's so obvious. And I'm like, bye. Because it doesn't have to be like this. In fact, it makes things harder when an environment is like that. And I do not know a lot of environments truly like that. I actually feel like if somebody were to be like, oh, is the industry super cutthroat? I'd be like, actually, no, everybody's incredibly supportive because we know the shit we go through. We know how hard.
Yeah.
And so it's either we cut each other down along the way or we like pick each other up. And like, that's the whole reason why I started, other than being able to pursue my acting career to the extent that I wanted to, the whole reason I started coaching was to take the people who are thinking about giving up on their dreams because they don't have the right version of learning how to prioritize things in their life, to keep them from doing that, and to kind of reignite that belief in the fact that they can do anything that they want to do, because it's really just about sustainability.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal point to leave off on. That is super, super critical. And I just, to go on top of that, to go off of what you said about that, along with being on film sets and celebration, because I agree. Like, that's also been my experience. Most of the film sets I've been on have been extremely supportive and positive. And for anybody who's listening, if you want to like just quadruple your how joyous your on-set experience can be, indie set or otherwise, do what you can to try to learn everybody's name and learn something about every person there, no matter how long you're going to be on the set for. Because the thing is, the one thing that people love in every language across the board, their favorite word in every language is their own name. And if you can remember something about them and their name, and also just talk and commune with them the entire time you're on set, everybody's experience becomes more joyous.
Yeah.
And but I will say, the sad part about this is our time is up, unfortunately. But Brittani, I want to say thank you so much for giving your time today, for coming on this podcast. And this episode was so good. I'm thinking I'm probably going to have you back down the road, because I think this is probably just the beginning of a very long conversation towards just like these basic things we've touched on. But before we wrap up, Brittani, where can people find you? And is there anything, either advice or anything else you'd like to talk about before you head out?
Yeah. So you can find me primarily on Instagram, and that's going to be at the Brittani O'Connell. And my name is spelled with, I guess if you're watching this in video format, you can see it's spelled with an I at the end. So it's just my name at the Brittani O'Connell on Instagram. That's where I post all things updates on acting, all things updates on coaching. And speaking of coaching, I do have like a little special thing for, I almost just spilled my tea on my lap there. A special little offering for anybody who is interested in this and maybe resonated with anything that I mentioned in terms of just like finding sustainability and just holistic wellness in terms of being able to pursue your career. I have some spots open on my roster right now, and I wanted to offer a little code that you could use if you listen to this episode and you come over to Instagram and you DM me the code ARTIST. So just ARTIST as in the Artists and Emotions podcast, DM ARTIST, and it'll be $100 off any of my coaching programs. So I just want to make it as accessible as possible for other people to be able to continue their creative career feeling, more confident and just sustainable than they have ever felt before. So that is something that I wanted to give to you and your in your audience. And that's pretty much it for me in terms of where you can find me. I'm pretty much located on Instagram. So Instagram is like, unfortunately, my baby nowadays. So it is where I live 90% of the time. So I'll be there. And in fact, most people can more get a hold of me on Instagram than they can like my own phone, because my phone is perpetually in do not disturb. So
I mean, that makes both of us. And hey, we connected through Instagram. That's why you're here.
Yes.
But anyway, for anybody who's listening to this podcast, you will see it on Instagram, because I'm sure I'll be able to get a link to be able to post it up. Once the podcast goes up, I will put it in the description of the podcast, but also on the post and on my story when this episode is up. So you'll be able to go check out all of Brittani's things. But Once again, Brittani, I just want to say a big old thank you to you for sharing your time, for sharing your perspective and everything. It's been great.
Thanks for having me, Cody. I can't wait to continue this, I'm sure, long standing conversation with you. We have a lot in common, and I'm looking forward to it for real.
This has been the Artists and Emotions podcast. My name is Cody Alexander Curtis, and I hope that you've been able to get something through my conversation with Brittani O'Connell today, whether that is business related or just life related in general, that you can bring with you on your own journey and on your own creative path. But until next time, my name is Cody Alexander Curtis. This has been the Artists and Emotions podcast, and I'll see you next time.